Podcast City Network.
This is Final Score, your number one podcast for sports news. Here are your hosts, Chris and Craig.
Hey everyone, it's Craig Campbell with Final Score on Podcast City Network, and we have a special edition tonight, and we've brought on Paris Jackson of the Showcase podcast joining us tonight. Talk about some NBA. The NBA season is right around the corner, and really excited for this interview and getting to know him and kind of getting to talk about the NBA and the 2021 season. So just before we get to that, make sure, go ahead and find Final Score and Podcast City Network on our social media outlets, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at PCN Final Score. And you can find any of our content, including this episode. You're going to find the audio versions on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, Podbean, Google Podcasts. And of course, you can find the video on YouTube. Just search keyword Final Score, one word. And with that, Paris, welcome to the show. Glad to have you on, man.
Thanks. Glad to be here. Super excited to talk about NBA. We are 1 week away. I can just feel the excitement, it's mounting, it's building. I'm so ready to just talk my heart out about some basketball with you, Craig. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's awesome. We were just talking before we started on the air here that very, very small off season, just about 2 months, especially for the Lakers and Heat. But for a basketball fan, like, this is kind of what we were hoping for, within reason, of course, to have as small of an off season as possible and get right back into it.
Definitely. It's almost like, I don't want to say we got robbed, right? We're in the middle of a pandemic, but the timing could not have been any worse for a basketball fan. I mean, with basically a week out from the start of the NCAA tournament, things kind of hit the fan and got to stop. So we were robbed of the NCAA tournament. We had a long break from the NBA, and then it came back. The bubble scenario was better than I think anybody could have imagined, and led to some great playoff moments that I think we're going to remember for a long time. And then, a quick turnaround to start back up in December right before Christmas is, I think, just what the doctor ordered as far as, being an NBA fan or a basketball fan in general. I'm super excited to just see where this season takes us.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. So, with your show, the Showcase, you talk a lot about the NBA. You've gone into some history episodes, which was pretty cool. And so definitely check those out. But also, most recently, you've talked about a little bit of betting and kind of how COVID has really kind of affected the last season and the upcoming season. So with that said, how do you think COVID's really going to affect the 2020 to 2021 season?
Yeah, I think there's definitely going to be some pros and cons. I think for a long time, the league has looked at how we can improve both the fan experience as well as the player experience. Looking back at last year, there was a lot of talk about potentially adding a mid-season tournament or something like that, or extending the All-Star break to give the players more of a rest, and they can kind of retool the back half. Because of COVID and the restrictions and everything like that, obviously the league is doing everything they can to minimize the travel and put in protocols for players to try and remain as healthy as possible. And in so we kind of have, we were kind of just talking about this before we started recording here, where, we do have this front half of the season already mapped out and everything like that. But the league understands that it may have to roll some games or postpone some due to a COVID outbreak or something like that. So they're able to retool the back half, kind of put in some premier lineups in nationally televised broadcasts and do some things that they haven't been able to do before, where they just announce the whole season and try and project exactly where a team is going to go. So I think, one of the biggest pros is the back half of the season, we're going to get nationally televised matchups that we've been dying to see, that would normally be like a random league pass game on a Tuesday or Thursday night, having the first half of the season play out, see how these new rosters are, see how these new draft picks fit in, and how some players that have changed teams really, affect their squads, is going to set up a back half that's just going to be, night after night of great basketball that's being available to everybody, not just anybody that has like a league pass or wanting to pay the extra amount. So I think that's a huge pro. On the flip side, though, because there's like the elephant in the room, right? The national pandemic on the side of things. We were, kind of robbed of a bit of an off season, right? Summer league was taken away. That's a good opportunity for rookies, second year guys, third year guys to kind of just show and prove what they got and where they can fit on a rotation. Same as with, coaches who should have the opportunity, maybe not head coaches, but assistant coaches, to run their offense through a certain team, see how things work, kind of retool it. And summer league is robbed. In addition to that, preseason is cut from 8 or 7 games per team. We have teams like the Warriors where they're only playing 2 games, so obviously from a preseason standpoint, much like the summer league, those attempts to, practice your rotations and different plays you want to run in a low stakes environment has been taken away. And I think that's a huge con, because I think now this rest of December and maybe even a little bit of January is going to be teams like testing the waters. And so we're going to see, a team like the Lakers or the Bucks or somebody else like the Raptors, who lost a couple of key pieces in Ibaka and Gasol, like go through a little bit of a stumble at the beginning of the season, and inevitably it might lead to a much closer race in terms of seeding at the end. So, as much as the bubble was a complete success, nobody can argue against that. No cases, great basketball, great games, playing pretty much every day. It was a huge success, but I think just the challenges of adding in travel, not having the bubble scenario where you're basically in basketball jail, which is kind of what I talked about on my last episode, which, you're in basketball jail having to stay in these bubbles, and it just doesn't make sense for a 72 game season. So players are going to be at risk and get COVID, and there may be an outbreak that sidelines the team for, a tenth of their season, or a single player for a tenth of their season. And, if there wasn't an asterisk on last season, there is a huge potential for an asterisk for any champion, this year, who may have benefited from, staying healthy and active. And so, of course, we'll have to see how it plays out, Craig, 100%. But at the same time, like, we're going into the season kind of cognizant of, having been shorted on the preseason and rotation and practice stuff. But on the flip side, we do get a nice little break in the middle, and the back half of the season should be very interesting, at least from a fan perspective.
Absolutely. And kind of, I think this is something that the NBA's really, as you mentioned, has been trying to work around, because they've, like you said, splitting up into first half, second half season, that really does set the table for if they need to, like, say the NFL has moved around a couple of teams, like the Steelers Ravens game is a perfect example how NFL has said they're not going to move games. And then a premier game happens. They're like, okay, we're going to move it to Monday, now Tuesday. Okay. Thursday afternoon. How about that? like Wednesday afternoon. So do you see that happening? Do you see that happening like for the NBA too, where if it becomes a big issue, especially in places, I know California is really cognizant of what's going on. Other states as well, like Michigan is another one where I'm from, like they are very cognizant, but other places like Florida, which is why the Raptors are coming down here, they don't really care. Like but do you see the NBA kind of like have an oh crap, like stuff hits the fan moment where they really have to make a decision of, like, should we take a little bit of time off at the break, or do you see them really run into that potentially?
Hopefully not. We don't get any type of shutdown where we go weeks and weeks without NBA. I think any type of, coronavirus outbreak is going to be hopefully isolated to either a team or a small number of teams, and kind of the show can go on for everybody else. I also think that the league kind of knows, what's going to happen or what can happen. I think luckily, I don't know how closely you follow the news, but the new, like, UPS and FedEx just this week have started, delivering vaccines to more places. Another vaccine provider has been approved, and whether you're pro or against vaccines, that's to be seen, but it is going to be available, and that may help teams stay healthy and things like that. And of course, like, they should go to the first responders and people that are on the front lines first. That makes sense. But once you get to that second or third group, that's where, if it comes readily available to everyone and everybody can be, vaccinated, we probably won't see that. But at the same time, ultimately, we are totally dependent upon the actions of the players that are in the league, right? Like, if they are traveling to a city and they're on the road, like, are they being smart about where they spend their time and who they engage with? And hopefully the answer is yes, right? I think, if this problem had happened maybe in the 90s or the 70s, we all know what was going on in the 70s in the NBA, right?
Yep.
Like, I think it would have been a much bigger problem. But today's generation of players has taken the LeBron lead, in the sense where, they understand that this is more than just a game for a lot of people, for themselves, for the people that they support within their own circle, and will hopefully make the decisions that will, inevitably lead to them being able to play on a night in, night out basis. So all that to say, Greg, hopefully not, and I think, the league is doing as much as they can to prevent it to happen. But at the end of the day, we are trusting people from the age of 19 to 35 or 39, if you're LeBron, to be smart and responsible. And, there's going to be a couple bad apples in every bunch.
Absolutely. I think that's one, especially talking about that, NBA has been, in my opinion, it's been probably the best league that has really kind of taken kind of the brunt, and they've faced it. They faced this head on versus other leagues, that haven't really, like, they tried to ignore it and kind of move around it. But I think that's part of the reason of what that break is also going to be for. We'll see where the country is at when that break comes up. And if we do have, like you said, that widespread vaccine and things are much better, we can allow fans now to come in and stuff like that. I think that'll be a very smart move and a very, like, telltale sign of where we're at then. And as if the NBA is going to move forward and just kind of keep, okay, let's start opening things back up. But do you think, I don't think there's a scenario in which they go backwards to a bubble where Orlando happened, just because there's too many teams. And I know on your podcast, you kind of dive into this a little bit, about this. Just doesn't make sense to have that many teams and that many players in a bubble all around each other. But we'll see what happens. That's definitely where we don't want it to go, but it's still could be a possibility, because we have no idea still how this is affecting everyone long term.
Definitely. The way I can kind of foresee it playing out, because the bubble that they did do did have 22 of the teams there out of 30. There were only 8 teams that weren't there, but the people that were there, like, the Lakers and the Heat, they were there for 100 days with no family or anything like that. So the only way that I can really see the bubble returning is if we somehow make it through the regular season, right? Cross our fingers there and hope we can do that.
Knock on wood everywhere in the house.
Exactly. But I think that sectioning off the playoffs into a bubble scenario is very likely and possible, because think about it, right? They have the new play-in game rules, but let's say we get past that in a normal, like, scheduling, whatever, right? That just goes how the rest of the season goes. And you take the 16 teams that are in the playoffs, and at least for, the first and second round, where you take, 4 teams and put them in a micro bubble. Then you take the next 4 teams and put them in a micro bubble, because, the first series will play out and then the second series play out. And then you have those, whoever wins and basically is in the conference finals come to another micro bubble. Now, it's going to take some doing, and I'm not a logistics guy. I can't do all that, right? I can't, do the Adam Silver and connect all the dots to make it happen. But there are some very smart people that are working for the NBA, and they did it once on a much bigger scale. But we might see the idea of the micro bubble as a potential for the playoffs. It would eliminate travel. They've already acknowledged that the elimination of travel and the ability for the players to just leave the court, go to bed, wake up, maybe do a small amount of rehab, but not have to get on a plane to go anywhere was hugely beneficial. Unless they're going to have fans, which I highly doubt it, unless, your name rhymes with Florida. But otherwise, they are, going to be fanless anyway. So the home court advantage doesn't come into play at all. And you can do these micro bubbles, and then, or even two, one for each conference, and then let the conference play out, and then have everybody come together in we'll just call it a championship bubble, because I'm just making this up off the fly here, Craig, I promise. But you'll see that be highly successful, I think. I mean, it'll be a smaller bubble opportunity, which means you can probably let more family and friends in, right, to make the experience better. I know, at least for the players that have kids and wives, like, let them come and hang out with their family, right? You don't necessarily need to do the bubble where they're at, but let them come, unless you're like Phil Rivers and you have, 10, 15 kids. Well, maybe just the young ones.
He fields a whole basketball team by himself.
Exactly, right? So he's got a whole roster. But you get my point, right? Where it's just bring the family, make it a little bit more livable, right? And at that point, you're not needing a whole hotel, so you can get the best, rooms and things like that. So they, like LeBron had a freaking suite in the bubble, right? Like, more players should be able to have that type of experience and make it more livable. And then it's not, maximum security basketball jail. It's like white collar, I fudge my taxes jail, right?
Right.
So that's where we're at with that. So, that's the way I see a bubble returning. For the regular season, though, it's just, it's too many teams, it's too much travel, it's too many games. Like, it's just, there's not a space where it makes sense. And even when they picked Orlando, like, the max they could do was 22. And even then we had games, like, it felt like March Madness, right? We had games starting at 8 a.m. and they wouldn't finish until 11 p.m., at least Pacific time. So that's the way I see it playing out. And I think what makes sense to me, but, I'm on the outside looking in.
Yeah, well, that's the best we can hope for, is that, things kind of play out the way that, a lot of experts are hoping it will. But like we said, the NBA has been probably the best prepared of any league so far when it comes to dealing with COVID-19. So hopefully they continue to work on that. And we can have a great NBA season with little to very, very few, if not any, hiccups. That'd be great.
That's
that'd be
what
ideal.
we're hoping for.
That'd be ideal. But that said, so we do have to talk about, when there is a season, who's going to come out of what division, and kind of how we're looking at. And I know one thing you've talked about on your podcast is about betting on who's going to win certain divisions. But alternatively to that, we're talking win totals. So, you gotta know there's been a lot of movement, even in the small offseason that we've had. But with that, we're going to cover some of the all the win totals here. We'll start in the East, and one of the conferences I think is really going to be very intriguing to watch is that Atlantic Division. We got the Sixers, the Celtics, the Knicks, Nets, and Raptors. So I guess starting in Philadelphia, you got a lot of movement there. Where do you see Philadelphia here this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think they made some incredible offseason moves, starting with, what they did in the front office to bring Daryl Morey in, bringing in the new head coach, Doc Rivers. Kind of always, when you look at an organization, you kind of start at the top and work your way down. And I think for years, like Elton Brand, whatever he was doing over there was just not working for the Sixers. They had a bunch of pieces, some bad contracts. And within a single offseason, albeit a very even shortened one, which makes it more impressive, they're able to clean up a lot of what was going on. Like, they moved on from Al Horford, which was a great move. They brought in some shooters around, Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, and they're going to be able to space the floor a little bit more. But granted, I look back at, what we talked about before about, not having this preseason, not having the summer league to like work out rotations and things of that nature, having the shortened off season. And you have to kind of wonder, how much of a stumble are they really going to do at the beginning? So, I was looking at their schedule, and granted, we already know that only the first half is out for the most part. And so we have to basically just take half the season and then double it, right? And maybe we give them an additional win because we're at 37. It's an odd number, but from just my looking through it, factoring in their back-to-backs and the travel and everything like that. I have them finishing at 24-13 for this first half through the first 37 games. So, if we're to double that and give them some love on the loss that they have, I have them finishing about 48-25. And being a team that's close to a 50-win team in a shortened season of 72, but because of just getting out the gates, I think a little slow and figuring out how all these pieces fit together in a brand new system, I don't see them taking the division, but definitely a playoff team for them. And that's where I kind of see them fitting. And I think Vegas has them kind of the same. They're finishing at, they have the over under set at 44.5. And with that, we kind of see where Vegas is in line with I am. It's like, well, maybe they can figure it out a little bit earlier and they can get over that 44 number, or maybe they take a little bit longer to figure it out and come below. And that's why I have the Sixers where they're at. And that's just what I think. I'm a huge Seth Curry fan because of my ties with his brother, who it goes without any introduction. But I think he adds a lot of the things that they were missing on the offensive end, and he hustles on the defensive end, and hopefully that spreads to the rest of the team. And Joel Embiid down low is able to do his thing.
Yeah, that was pretty shocking to me. That I thought it was kind of surprising that Dallas would be willing to move on from him, especially with he's been a pretty big contributor, and you got that team in Dallas, and it kind of looks like they were setting things up to make a little bit of a run there. And then, but moving him over to the 76ers, that was a pretty big move, and definitely in my opinion. But you mentioned they were finishing second. In first place, you have the Boston Celtics taking this division. They've had a little bit of movement too. I guess, how do you see them finishing the first half?
I think that the Celtics are, for lack of a better word, Eastern Conference sweetheart, right? They came in, they had the Game 7 against LeBron a few years ago, and his last finals appearance with the Cavs, and just, went toe to toe, and they were a young crew, right? And they haven't had any big moves. I think actually getting rid of Gordon Hayward and not having that dynamic of, hey, do I belong? Do I not belong? Am I one of the cool kids? Like, where is my role on the court? Am I injured? Am I ready to go? Like, removing Gordon Hayward from the equation. Well, don't get me wrong. Gordon Hayward was a good player in his day on the Jazz, and has just had a ton of bad luck and one of the freakish injuries we've seen in a long time. But removing him from the equation and just focusing on this young core is, inevitably going to lead them very far. And I think having them, they have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, right? They had some tough series, made it to the Eastern Conference Finals again, and it came down to pretty much every single game was back and forth with the Heat, and ultimately they weren't able, to get over the hump in the scenario. But they're going to take that and make it so they have a great season and make a deep push. I have them winning this division, which is completely stacked if you look at all the teams minus the Knicks, which goes without saying. But the rest of the division is incredibly stacked, and I have them taking the division. I also have them coming out of the Eastern Conference. Wow. That's my confidence level in the Celtics right now. I just feel that this team continues to get better on a year in, year out basis. And I have a lot of faith in Jason Tatum and where he can take this team, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I know last year when they had brought in Kemba Walker, and then that was I was high on them last year too. And then, like you said, with Gordon Hayward and that gruesome injury, like that really set him back. And now him out of the picture, like you said, guys are a little bit more free they know kind of where they're going and, how do they fit in? Because they played so long without him. So yeah, definitely. I was pretty high on them last year. I would really be intrigued to see how they kind of fall out and manage. And probably one of the most interesting teams that is in this division, the Brooklyn Nets. I mean, they've got all this hype around them, and they've got two stars that haven't even played in a year, or maybe two.
Definitely. I mean, Kevin Durant, man, what can't be said about him? He's just electric on the court. He's a scorer. He, unfortunately, just off the court has not gotten the love from the media that I think is deserving of a player of his caliber. Same with Kyrie. I think some of his thoughts and what he says off court and into a microphone and calling media pawns and things like that. It's I like to think of myself at least as a rook or something like that, or a
Right.
bishop more so than a pawn, king of my own house. But I think that they get a lot of slander around some of the things that they do off the court, but on the court they are an unstoppable force. Unfortunately for the Nets, the reason I didn't have them ranked higher is because from a guard position, I think that they are set, right? They have, Kyrie, Spencer Dinwiddie, Karis LeVert. Like, they have a ton of good pieces that all kind of play the same role. But then when you go to the end of the roster and kind of look at what they have from a big perspective, yeah, sure, Kevin Durant can play the floor, and he's a great defensive player, but he's going to need a rest. And when he comes off the court, I mean, you're left with DeAndre Jordan and Jared Allen. Jared Allen is going to be a great player. I think he's going to get a lot of respect throughout his career. And, he has the great hair and everything like that. So you know exactly where he is on the court. He's easy to spot. Maybe that's why I watch him so much. But honestly, I think they're seriously lacking in the big department. And in a league that's, a little bit faster pace, more mid-range and three-point shooting, it might be not as important as it used to be. But I still think it's a key piece of the game, being able to, get rebounds and things like that. And their bigs, while they're good down low, in a sense, they're kind of lacking on the defensive end, and they really are lacking in terms of shooting and spacing the floor. So if teams know they just need to crowd KD and Kyrie and, let the other guys beat us down low, then their other teams are just going to rain on them from deep. And unfortunately, that's going to cause them to lose some games. And then, similar to the 76ers, they got a bunch of new pieces that they need to fit together, including their coaching staff, right? Steve Nash in his first year as a coach. We got Mike D'Antoni, coming on over from the Rockets. And, unfortunately, it's just going to take some time to figure it out. I'm very high on them for the 2021-2022 season, but I think this season they just got to, earn their wings and earn their stripes a little bit before I rank them any higher.
Yeah, that's I think been one thing that's really been, the jury's been out on that, is those two, KD and Kyrie, have not played together. And we even saw it when you get superstar players together, even going back to the Miami Heat days with LeBron and Bosh and Wade, it took them a little bit to at least mesh. I mean, yeah, they pulled it together and got to the finals in their first year together, but this is a little bit different because even in that own division, the Nets have a lot of stiff competition.
Definitely.
One of them being the next team, the Raptors. I mean, they've had a lot of pieces moving too, and they've got a lot of new things there. And I mean, there's still no slouch, but I guess what kind of quickly, what do you kind of see them kind of finishing here this year in the first half?
Honestly, I think, losing Marc Gasol and Serge Ibaka and replacing them with Aaron Baines, and I'm forgetting who they replaced him with, but Aaron Baines and one other player is trading in an older model for a new model that just isn't as good. Kyle Lowry just continues to get older. I was glad to see Fred VanVleet get cashed out. I think he's had some incredible moments throughout the playoffs. Pascal Siakam, hopefully he's added a couple of other tools to his belt. And they may be a surprise for where they finish off in the record, but based on how stacked the rest of the division is, and they got some tough back-to-backs if you look at their schedule, I do have them finishing above 500 at 20-17, but I just from a talent standpoint, I just don't think that they have enough to compete with what's going on in the rest of the division. Against the rest of the East, for sure, they probably still will get a playoff berth. Don't get me wrong. I just think that this team has gotten steadily worse since that 2019 championship that they were able to win with Kawhi.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you're talking about some of those moves that they lost, losing Ibaka and Gasol, and some of those, like they have, I was kind of surprised to see Fred VanVleet stay. You figured that he was talking about he wanted to get paid, and more power to him. He deserves to get paid. But I thought he maybe would leave and go somewhere else, and that would really be a kind of a crushing blow to this team. But him staying there helps a little bit with that continuity. But yeah, it's definitely going to be a little tough. And them being Like I said, they are coming down to Tampa Bay to play
Yep.
their regular season. So it'll be really interesting to kind of see how that dynamic plays out. Most of these guys, if that's what their home is going to be, it probably shouldn't affect it too much, but you never know. That could
Mhm.
very well play into it.
Yeah, and almost they're far, if they are established in Toronto, they're going to be away from their family even when they're at home games. So
Mhm.
you wonder how that's going to wear on them psychologically. But at the end of the day, honestly, I think the Raptors are made chock full of guys like that are just have a sense of loyalty, and that's why ultimately Fran VanVleet chose to stay. Mark
Mhm.
Gasol and Serge Ibaka both made their careers elsewhere before they came. But players like, Kyle Lowry, even DeMar DeRozan, I mean, they traded him away to get Kawhi, and he was very surprised because and I don't know, we can take this with a grain of salt, but he very much made it vocal how much he liked Toronto and wanted to stay there, and the energy
Yeah.
of, the Canadian crowd. So, we'll see. We'll see how Toronto goes, but that division is stacked.
Yeah, and the one team that's going to be kind of on the butt end of all that is probably the New York Knicks.
Oh
Got
yeah.
them, you got them finished dead last. I think they made some good moves in the offseason,
Mhm.
getting rid of some contracts, bringing in a few guys. But I mean, in this division, you can't expect a whole lot out of the Knicks this year.
No, I mean, the one bright spot I think that the Obi Toppin falling to them in the draft is going to make for some interesting league pass games. Maybe they'll start to be, I have basically, a couple of stages of a team where you start off god awful and you can't even compete for anything, right? Let alone, 4 quarters. You can maybe compete for, a quarter a game, right? Then we start to compete for 2 quarters, but then 2 quarters we drop it, right? And then eventually we can compete for 4 quarters a game, but then we don't end up winning. And then the next stage, of course, is competing for 4 quarters and learning how to win. And then the last of which is competing for the whole game, learning how to win and doing it consistently. And unfortunately, the Knicks are very, very much at stage 2 of that, or they can compete for a quarter or two,
Yeah.
but ultimately they can't compete for 4 quarters. And you're exactly right. The rest of the division is stacked. The Knicks are kind of like the ugly redheaded stepsister of the whole division. And I both my parents are from New York. I'd love to see New York do well, but unfortunately, until something major happens or Obi Toppin becomes the LeBron of his generation, I just don't foresee it happening anytime soon for Knicks and Knicks faithful.
Yeah, they've got a few moves to make yet, but getting rid of some of that dead weight, old bad contracts, and bringing in Tom Thibodeau, I think is going to help because we've seen him succeed with those younger players that he can just impose his will onto those players. You've
Definitely.
seen that happen, so really intrigued by to see just their progress. But yeah, in this division, it's going to be kind of tough. But moving on to East Central, it's the Milwaukee Bucks and everybody else at that point, kind of how we've got that spaced out. And with Giannis signing his Supermax deal as of today,
Oh yeah.
when we record, that's big news for Milwaukee fans.
Definitely, and it's been a while since Milwaukee fans have had somebody like Giannis on their squad. I mean, we go all the way back to the early '70s with Lou Alcindor, aka Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and the impact and the championship he was able to bring. And just it's been a floundering team until they were able to kind of luck out and get Giannis when they did. And he's committed to staying there, and I think they're committed to putting some pieces around him. We saw them acquire Drew Holiday. And, they have their own little bit of retooling that they need to do, but I have a lot of confidence in Giannis to continue being that MVP caliber, DPOY caliber player that he is on a night in, night out basis, and continue to push this Bucks team higher and higher. The rest of this division, unfortunately, man, I mean, it's slim pickings between the Bulls, the Pistons, the Cavs, and the Pacers. I would be surprised if any of these teams finish above 500. Pacers, I think, got the best shot. They finally got Oladipo back together. They got Sabonis playing quality minutes, coming off his plantar fasciitis injury last year. TJ Warren finally got some respect on his name during the bubble. And so the Pacers got some decent pieces, but man, they got a tough schedule, and and they got a lot of growing to do before they're able to compete with this Bucks squad.
Absolutely. And kind of looking at the moves that they made, or I guess lack thereof, the Pacers, in my opinion, we look at the Pacers, two teams that didn't really do a lot that should have, the Pacers and like the Magic, which we'll talk about them later. But, the Pacers didn't really do a whole lot. And I think it's going to only hurt them. And in this division, it was like, because you're definitely not competing for the division with how many moves Milwaukee's made, and you got Giannis, and he's a force in nature, but you're really basically trying to fight for a 6, 7, 8 playoff seed in this conference.
Yeah.
So, one of the other team that I just want to touch on, just because I'm from there, the Detroit Pistons. We got them. I'm actually very surprised with some of the moves that they did. Happy as well. I mean, you got finally getting rid of some of the bad contracts a little bit, but they still haven't moved things around. I really like the Killian Hayes pick. He's already the fact that we got him at 7, or the Pistons got him at 7, was pretty surprising to me. But he's already locked down the starting role, which is great for that. And interested to see if they take even a little step forward. But do you have any kind of thoughts on what they did this offseason?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Getting Killian Hayes as an international player, I think he's one of those most like plug and play players that they could have got in this draft, and having him fall all the way to 7 was definitely lucky for him. I don't think that they, necessarily made the best move in getting rid of Luke Kennard and Christian Wood. Those were two of your shining players last year when D Rose and Blake Griffin were dealing with their injury problems. But speaking of those two at the end there, they definitely got a bit of a chip on their shoulder. D Rose has had his career that we all just know has been plagued by injury. He had his 50-point game against the Timberwolves, and then ultimately with the Timberwolves and gets traded to the Pistons. And he's just one of those, those stories that you hope he does better and better every year. Blake Griffin, we remember him jumping over Kia cars and things like that, and in Lob City. But if he can be like 90% of the player that he was there, the Pistons could be one of those teams that are surprising. I think Killian Hayes, just to go back to him for a second, he had a bit of a turnover problem, which hopefully he can get cleaned up. Dwayne Casey, everybody forgets how good the Toronto Raptors team was under Dwayne Casey, and just really how good of a coach he is. Unfortunately, he's just been burdened with not having a depth of talent like some of these other teams. But, the Pistons are continuing to be competitive for that 8, 9, 10 spot, and they got a little bit of, of something to strive for, that, setting the bar a little bit lower, and maybe they make the playoff game or the play-in game.
And we're talking about the Southeast Division. You've got a few teams in there that are, you got the Heat, and again, kind of everybody else here. So what's kind of your some thoughts on who finishes where in the Southeast?
Definitely. I mean, I got the Heat coming out of the division. They're the minus 250 favorites, which basically means you have to bet $250 to win $100. That's how much of a favorite they are in terms of Vegas. And I think they only got better by trading out Jay Crowder for Avery Bradley and what he's able to do. Looking at the rest of the division, though, I mean, it's definitely a far departure from the Central Division. I mean, the Hawks and the Wizards are definitely two teams that I can see, figuring it out very quickly and making a huge jump. Trading John Wall for Russell Westbrook and basically immediately bringing back a player with the skill set of John Wall and Russell Westbrook is only going to make the Wizards that much better. And then the Hawks did a ton of retooling and are in a position to compete so long as Trey is able to, share the ball a little bit and make some things happen. Magic and the Hornets, they got a long way to go before, they're able to really do something. Magic has always been one of those teams that somehow make it into the 8th seed, and we might see them in the playoff game just off the strength of the rest of the division. But I got, same way I got love for D Rose, I got a lot of love for Markelle Fultz just with his story and what he's able to overcome. So, that's my little bit about that particular division, but you're hitting right on the head, Heat and everybody else.
Yeah. And being local to the Magic here, one of the things I've been harping on them for basically the last year or two is they haven't made enough moves to really kind of move the needle. They're kind of content with just being in the 8th spot. So yeah, it's really, with that division getting a little bit tougher, some of those flaws are really going to come out, definitely come to light. So let's move on to the West. We'll kind of wrap it up here a little bit, and we'll talk about the West. Let's start in the Northwest Division. How do you see some teams kind of falling out here?
Honestly, I mean, it's a pretty tough looking division. At least 60% of it. We've got the Blazers, the Nuggets, the Jazz, all pretty much in contention for that first seed. The things I'm concerned about with the Jazz is they really don't have a second unit that is as able to compete at a high level. Their first unit is great. Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert, Bogdanovic, the pieces that they have around it. I think the Jazz first unit is great, but their second unit is really lagging, and all these back-to-backs or 2 games in 3 days are really going to catch up to the Jazz very quickly. Same kind of goes for the Nuggets. We were just talking about the Pistons and some of the players they picked up, and Jeremy Grant and Mason Plumlee, who played some big minutes for the Nuggets, in the bubble, and were able to contribute to some things scoring when other players weren't able to. But my odds-on favorite to come out of this division has to be the Portland Trailblazers. We saw them in the bubble almost do the impossible to even get in the playoffs. Then it comes out CJ McCollum is basically playing with a broken back. We talked Mike Tyson final, and we kind of go from there. But Damian Lillard continues to just be that guy that's putting it down for Oaktown and putting it down for the Bay in Portland. And hats off to Terry Stotts and what they're building in Portland. And I think they added some solid pieces, bringing in as Cantor back, re-signing Melo. Hopefully CJ McCollum fixes his back, and that's not a lingering problem for them. But over these past few years, the Blazers have just had a ton of injuries that have harped them on the end of the season. I mean, this is still a team 2 years ago that went to the Western Conference Finals and basically limped through the whole thing. And that's why Golden State was able to make it past them with no KD and a struggling Clay. But if they're able to stay healthy, I think the Blazers have a great shot at coming out of this division and making a pretty deep run in the playoffs.
Yeah, people are very quick to forget how good that team was just even a few short years ago. Moving on into the Pacific Division, we've got the defending champs, the LA Lakers, and you've got the battle for LA, you've got your Warriors in this division, and a much improved Suns team. How do you see this division playing out?
We talked about these teams that kind of like need to retool and have the pieces fit in, and that's where I think the Suns are. Bringing in Chris Paul is great, but yet again, we got another team that's kind of robbed of the opportunity to see how these pieces fit together. Granted, CP3 brings in a veteran experience, and he's definitely a huge upgrade from Ricky Rubio, but this rest of the division is absolutely stacked. Unless you're the Kings, who, have a promising player in De'Aaron Fox, but just aren't going to be able to compete with the other teams in the division. I have the Warriors, I think, a little bit of a homer bug on them, finishing at 27-10. That's undeniable, but bringing back Steph Curry and finally filling a gap at the big with James Wiseman is going to be huge for them. And if Draymond Green can elevate to where he played, at least from an effort and defensive end, in that 2015-2016 season, we're going to see some great things. But ultimately, and unfortunately, with LeBron and AD powering up and bringing in Gasol and just Dennis Schroeder, and the Lakers team has only gotten better. LeBron continues to show why he's the most dominant player potentially ever. Where you fall on the side of the debate is for a different podcast for sure. But, arguably, 1A, 1B is LeBron James for sure, wherever you put him. And his ability to just come in year after year and just dominate, right? The story used to be, he's hiding in the East. Well, guess what? He's in the West now, and he's the defending championship. And, I have them, as much as it breaks my heart to say, the loss of Klay Thompson has made me kind of give in. And Lakers are honestly my pick to come out of the West and repeat in the championship. I think LeBron James is going to get his second repeat of his career. And, that's where I stand in this division. But definitely, the first few spots in the Western Conference seeding belong to this Pacific division for sure.
Yeah, and having just Steph Curry back and back on the court is just good for the game in general, good for the NBA. I mean, can you imagine just having at the end of the first half, if it falls the way kind of you may predict it to go? I mean, that's going to be a really exciting division to watch in that second half of the season. And obviously with Klay Thompson, we wish him the best, wish him to get healthy. It just sucks to see that those types of injuries happen to such a good guy. So Best of luck. Hopefully he gets better there. Last division we're going to talk about is the Southwest Division. You got the Mavericks, the Grizzlies, and then of course the Rockets, which we have no idea what they're doing anymore. I guess, how do you see it playing out in the Southwest Division?
I think that the media and this James Harden situation, him being at the ice ball, him being at strip clubs, whatever. What I see is a guy that has to go to work, has to go to basketball jail again, knows what it was like, and wants to have a little fun before he goes there. I mean, don't get me wrong. We're in a national pandemic. A lot of people will condemn him for the actions. No mask. You know what you're doing, the risk you pose. But at the same time, we all know what it's been like to be locked up and not be able to go to a concert, not be able to go to a club, not be able to do a lot of the things that are perfectly acceptable in the off season for a player to do in normal circumstances, and just have a reprieve before you go into this multi-month, grind, where you're traveling, you're playing every other day. Unfortunately, they got a brand new coach who it's kind of a dick move to do that to, if we're being honest, right? Yeah. At least and we don't know the conversations that they're having, off wax, for lack of a better word. But honestly, seeing Boogie and John Wall on the court again, like, I don't know if you've seen these preseason games, that the Rockets have played so far, but I'm super excited for John Wall to come back and be that all-star caliber player that he was going to. And if I had to argue at this point, I would have to argue, not seeing Russ and how he fits in on the Wizards, but I'd have to argue that the Rockets actually won this trade if John Wall is able to elevate to even 90% of where he used to be. And same with Boogie Cousins. He's a great center. He's a knockdown three-point shooter. And he just brings a certain level of energy to this Rockets team that I think they've been lacking since, losing Capella and trying this small ball thing that didn't work out.
Yeah, absolutely. And really going to be intrigued to see how does the dynamic play out between John Wall and James Harden, with kind of how James Harden likes to play the game. It's going to be interesting, but I would love to see that dynamic. And like you said, the Rockets have kind of gotten a little bit of a spark in some areas they haven't seen in quite a while, which is good to see out of Houston and for their fan base.
Yeah, and honestly, they're actually my pick to come out of this division. At plus 325, they're definitely an underdog. I think a lot of that is playing in with, how will John Wall come back? How will Harden deal with what's going on in the media? But if you look at their schedule and you look at the Mavericks schedule, the Rockets have much more advantageous back-to-backs throughout this whole, at least for the first half. And if they're able to, pull an iota of what they were able to do with Russ and Harden in that, January to March, bracket before the shutdown, where they were playing some great basketball that often gets overlooked. The Rockets are my pick to go ahead and come out of this division. It might come down to a couple of tiebreakers between him and the Mavericks, but I am very excited to see how the second year of this Ja Morant versus Zion Williamson plays out. If Zion's able to stay healthy and if Ja's going to be able to continue to be this just absolute athlete that he's been. He's almost like a Westbrook Jr., but that can actually shoot. Like, I'm so excited about Ja Morant and his career and his trajectory. And so this is a fun division. If you ever see them and you're able to click it on throughout this season, and maybe on a slow night where these teams are playing, this would be the division to watch just for some young studs.
Yeah, Ja Morant was so much fun to watch last year. And I don't know if you've seen recently pictures of Zion Williamson. That dude he's basically chiseled himself. And it's scary.
Oh, yeah.
It is scary for the rest of the league.
You come in and whatever he was doing in college, I'm sure he was on a great program. But when you start to come around these men in the league, right?
Yeah.
Like, especially Steven Adams, he's coming in with his Australian strength, like, good day, mate, we're going to lift weights, and it just helps him get into true form. And if he can stay off the IR list, then, he's going to have a great season for sure, which he should have had last year, and yeah. We were robbed having him only play about 20 games.
Yeah, he's definitely fun to watch. Especially that first couple games that he played, definitely changed my mind about him coming into the season. A lot of people talking about how much hype he had, but then when he came in and backed it up, and now looking at basically how he's been taking more care of himself. Because let's be real, college college nutritionist and then the NBA, you're around every single day. That is your job.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
yeah, it's great to see, I'm excited to see how this team kind of improves over this coming first half of the season. But we're going to wrap this thing up, and we are going to tell everybody how they can learn more about your podcast, about the Showcase.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram at PGA Showcase. I do picks on a daily basis for those that have a little bit of a gambling itch, but maybe basketball isn't their best sport. I post picks every single day for absolutely free. I'm just doing this for the love of the game and getting my voice out there. So go ahead and follow me on Instagram, follow me on Twitter so you can get those. As far as listening to new episodes, I usually do an episode every Thursday. So it's out and it's ready to go kind of for you listening pleasure over the weekend. I'm on, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, pretty much anywhere where you can find podcasts, you can find the Showcase. And, I'm super excited to have been on your show and thanks. And I'm honored and it's been fun. Heck yeah.
Absolutely. Well, hey, we're looking forward to having you on again, Paris, and looking forward to hearing more from you and your show in the coming days. And happy NBA season for you. We're glad to have it back.
Happy NBA season is correct. 'Tis the season. That's right.
All right. Thanks a lot, Paris, and we'll talk to you soon.
Podcast City Network.